Hello and welcome to another edition of the One Team We Agree On. I'm Jillian.
And I'm Kyle. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great because I'm on summer break and I've been watching a ton of the World Cup and life's been pretty good.
Yeah, we're back for another episode. I know it's been it's been like a week or two since we recorded, but we have a very special guest, Jillian.
Yes, we do. We are pleased to have a great conversation with Mark Franek. He is the author of American Soccer Nation, which we had the pleasure to read, and there will be a review on our website about that as well. But yeah, Mark dives into the history of American soccer. Really great read. Definitely recommend. And yeah,
Yeah,
and
and as you know, we're talking about the American history of soccer. We have a couple shirts today that
mhm.
on what we're wearing. What are
Yeah.
you wearing?
So I am wearing Philadelphia Adams of the NASL, which was before my time, but it was one thing that was covered in the book. And um,
Another thing that was covered in the book, the
yeah,
Las Vegas Quicksilvers of the NSL.
yeah. So I think it was really fascinating here learning about the NASL, which I knew some about, but like I learned so much more about it. And
We spent a lot of time on the NASL. Well, there was a lot about that.
yeah. So, and if you're not already following us, make sure you follow us on our socials. We're at TOTWAG on Twitter and on Blue Sky. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at the One Team We Agree On. I'm at silly double underscore Jilly on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm also on TikTok at Jillian underscore Almany. And I actually been posting some things on TikTok, so go check it out. And you, Kyle, are at Coach Almany on the platforms. So yeah, we have a great conversation. And like I said, we'll have a book review. Check out the one team we agree on.com as well as, wherever you get your podcast for all of our stuff. Yeah, but without further ado, let's dive into it. Here we are with our conversation with Mark Franek. All right. We are so pleased today to be speaking with author and YSC English teacher Mark Franek on his book, American Soccer Nation, which we had the pleasure of reading. And Mark, welcome to our episode.
Thank you, Jillian, Kyle. It's great to be here for listeners and for viewers. I'm glad to spend this time with you.
So, for people out there listening, really interesting background too for Mark because you got it you started out as a teacher, right? And left teaching for a while, went to the legal field, and then went back to teaching, being at YSC Academy. So, just for the listeners who are not aware, can you please share why you decided to write this book in the first place?
So yeah, I was hired by Dr. Ahmed Nuha Lee, who's the head of school at YSC Academy, and that's the high school that's completely embedded within the Major League franchise of the Philadelphia Union. And it was a gift there by the Grahams. Richie Graham gave a gift to the school. So I'm hired as an English teacher. I'm coming out of the law and back to my first love, which is to teach 4 classes of English every day. And if that was not glorious enough to jettison the billable hours scenario and teach novels that I liked and to teach kids how to write. She, a couple months into my return to teaching, said, and I want you to develop a history of U.S. soccer class. And I'm like, you're going to pay me for this? And she said, sure. So yes, it was started by a charge from the head of school with the support of Richie Graham. And it didn't go so well at first because I found after reading, as many books as I could get my hands on, that a lot of the stuff that's out there, it was pretty negative and dull as to the American soccer story.
Yeah, and I found that your book was really engaging actually, and you have some good humor in there, and it was really, easy to follow and easy to read, and made it very interesting.
Yeah, when you say it was very dull, like some of the historical pieces.
Like really dry, huh?
Yeah, like expand on what do you mean by that? Because I understand that growing up when I would read early books
Mhm.
there, A, there wasn't much there, and B, it was always very, I would say, scholarly
Mhm.
research. So I just
Yeah,
want to get your
good.
take.
Right. So first, just imagine my audience. My audience is our 14, 15-year-olds, ninth and 10th,
Mhm.
14, 15, maybe 16-year-old teenagers. And they don't have a lot of tolerance for busy work, right? On the
Mhm.
pitch, they want to grind, they want to get better. In the classroom, they don't necessarily want to be entertained, but come on, these are alpha males and they don't want to trudge through academic work that's dull and boring. So as to the soccer books, right, they fall into several categories, Kyle. They are either, as you pointed out, academic in nature, which means a lot of footnotes. What 14-year-old wants to read a chapter that's half full of footnotes? Every page goes from 12, 10-point font, and you go down below and it's 8-point font. Oh my God, they want to stab their eyes out with the nearest corner flag. So yeah, that's academic, right? Now, if it's not academic, then it's fragmented. And it's not the writer's fault that it's fragmented. I can turn back to that in a second. It's about how the American press and what they want to publish or don't want to press. When I say publish, rather, when I say fragmented, it either covers a specific aspect of the soccer story. It won't be about the whole MLS. It might be about the Beckham experiment in the MLS, or the early years of the MLS, or the last 10 years that were really on a rocket ship, or the NASL, right? Or maybe the early part, pre 1900s, because book publishers in general don't like foundational stories, if you will. They want to publish pockets, which is fine, but it's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach our kids the story and the highlights and the good things and some of the dumb things we've done. So academic, fragmented, and last, oftentimes dull and just negative about the soccer story. Yeah, we've done, our ambassadors, we have done, Americans, a lot of stupid things to ourselves. We've shot ourselves in the foot several decades at a time, and we made some really dumb mistakes with some greedy owners and some bad administrative decisions. But listen, what high schooler, and I'm going to give you two titles of actual books, what high schooler wants to read a book titled Why the U.S. Will Never Win the World Cup? Can you see Kevin Sullivan or any of the young pros in my class wanting to read a book with that title? Or the other one by Bruce Arena, which is a decent book all in all, but it just has a negative sounding title. What's wrong with us, U.S., the pun on us? What's wrong with us? A lifetime of flubs or something after spending a lifetime on the sidelines. The titles themselves are negative because the book publishers who get to decide the titles think that being negative about America sells. So yeah, academic, fragmented, and the actual story itself swayed too far in the negative direction. And I think that this is just missing almost the entire point of those people who really know some about soccer and want to know more. It's more things to celebrate and to admire about the American story than to despise.
Yeah, no, I thought it was fascinating reading about all that early history as well. I had no idea. I mean, if I'm being honest, I started even following MLS a little bit because of David Beckham. Okay. That's what got me like, oh, he's on this team called LA Galaxy. Okay. I really honestly didn't know that much about it at the time. I isn't to soccer as Kyle was, but that. And then I actually had used to coach one of the former Union players when he was
And who
younger.
was that?
So
Who was that? Can you
Andrew
tell me?
Wanger. Andrew
Okay,
Wanger.
yeah,
I
great.
actually coached him on swim team back in the day, and him and his siblings did some babysitting, that sort of thing too. So it's just kind of wild. He's from, my area. So I kind of started following Union then at that point. I was like, oh, that's cool. He's on Union. Let me, keep track of that. So, but it's wild. But yeah, I had no idea about some of these in the early history. And so I think just that was really enlightening and helps you appreciate everything so much more. And like I said, it was very easy to follow and engaging. So I think that makes it I definitely, as someone who teaches, middle schoolers, I appreciate the fact that, yeah, getting their interest sometimes is a little more challenging, but yeah, I feel like that would be something that they would enjoy for sure.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I
and
think yeah, I think the early chapters, I mean, basically the early chapters in my particular book, I mean, it's hard to make mob football, and as exciting as it sounds, when you read about a bunch of schoolboys getting together and trying to clobber each other to move a round ball from one place on campus to the other, you can get about a paragraph of that in, but there's, it's difficult to teach young men, young boys, and readers, by the way, the 1800s. Soccer was rivaling baseball, and that's part of the story. We were neck and neck with baseball for the first 75 years of American history. And some of the earlier chapters really are stories of teams and leagues that rose and that played for a while, gravitated people to them, first generation and many immigrants, and then folded. And it's hard to tell stories about dead or dormant things that are over 100 years old. But I try to do it in a positive way to remind readers that soccer has always been here for 150 years. It never disappeared or died out completely. And there's a lot of wonderful stories of resilience and diversity and hard work and commitment that are left untold or rarely explored.
Yeah, and I actually really appreciate that you brought up the whole diversity thing because I found that interesting too to note because I was like that was like a light bulb when I read that. I was like, oh, yeah, actually, when you think about it, soccer's been so much more diverse and it hasn't had it's not like you noted with Jackie Robinson and breaking the color barrier and all that. Like it's been just all the way up through much more diverse. And I think and it shows in the fan base too. You know, you get a lot of diversity, although our good friends who are of the Latin community, they're like, oh, we need to get more, more of the Mexican fans and more, you know, just Latin community in that fan base because that would really enrich the fan base, and I agree. But
Yeah,
when you see like Leagues Cup, and some of these games where other teams come in, I love it. But yeah, no, I appreciate that part. I was like, you know what, actually, yeah, I never thought about that, but that's really true.
it is. It is.
Yeah. And so like what were some things that maybe you didn't know prior to researching the book that stood out to you? Like maybe anything
Yeah, so
surprising?
I didn't know. I was talking to my wife a month or so ago about this. We were out to dinner, and the funny thing is, I told her, "Listen, I wrote this book. It was a 2.5 year journey. It was glorious. I apologize. I'm taking you to Budokan. Here, drink as much as you want, and have I order off the as much as you want on the menu because you tolerated me." But what I really learned is a bunch of things. As much as I thought I knew soccer, I mean, I'm in my mid 50s and I played and followed and coached and taught and been around athletes my whole life. I would say that 90% of the details and the stories in the book I did not know. That doesn't mean I was ignorant. It's just that you can follow and fall in love with soccer and play it at a high level, but it's not broadcast. You can't find media on it. Some of the social media now that's opening up with people like you and others, we're getting a lot better in the last decade. But listen, if you take a look, the one way to describe it, there's this book series that's now defunct called the Best American Sports Writing. It had a 30-year run from the late 1980s on up to like 2018. And there was only one, one story about American soccer out of over 1,000 pieces written by great writers from The Athletic to Sports Illustrated, all this, right? So the media didn't follow soccer, doesn't tell our stories, and when it get bubbled up to their interest, it was almost always negative. It was this flywheel effect. So it was always being negative. But going back to your point, I didn't know that much about it. And one of the great things of many stories that I was delighted to discover is who knew that from 1921 to 1931, there was a fully professional league in America called the American Soccer League, ASL. And it was the first league in history to have the word soccer in the title. And the word has its own story. Don't need to get into that right now. But here we have this ASL, this league that was operating on the four quarters, which I call United States, roughly from Philadelphia on up to Newark, Kearny, New Jersey, New York City, Brooklyn, Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Falls River, Massachusetts, and on up to Boston. So that circuit for a decade where mostly fully professional. There were some volunteers, but they were oftentimes being paid. Their better players were rivaling some of the baseball salaries, $4,000 to $5,000 per year, that were playing in front of fee-paying crowds all up and down the United States. And it really was putting United States on the launch pad to become an internationally respected country. And unfortunately, it died or nearly died a death because of the 1-2 punch known as an internal soccer war and the Great Depression. But the league, how many soccer people know, and even people who love soccer, that for a decade there, soccer was rivaling baseball for the amount of paying fans and the amount of wages and the amount of fan base, not accepting the New York Yankees and the Mets phenomenon with the Babe Ruth. But soccer was on a roll there for a decade, and we almost got over the hump that would have put us probably in the top 10 for the next couple of decades. Instead, we took a different path and sunk and landed in the soccer desert.
Yeah, no, that's interesting too because yeah, I had no idea about any of that
I had heard stories about it through like when I got on the NASL, like research, like I told you earlier. I started researching some other leagues around, pre that. And I, but like you, that's more than I ever have heard. I just saw like little footnotes, like you said, paragraph about the ASL back then. There wasn't much, but I had heard about it. But that's interesting that during that time, it even rivaled baseball. And yeah, I'm curious to hear about some more of these leagues as well, because I know you touched on some other ones, and we'll get to that in a second. But I do want to ask you a question. That, during your research, like everything, you're studying all this stuff. Were there some rabbit holes that you found this and then you found this other thing? Next thing you know, you're going down a whole nother like realm of American soccer history that it could go deeper and you're like, you know what? Either A, this is probably getting off topic, or B, it's just gonna totally disinterest people. Were there times like that in your writing?
Sure, I'll tell you one, and this is a story that is probably more well known than others, but the details still have not been ironed out. Because when you're sifting through papers or yearbooks or any type of writing that was done 100 years ago, some of it doesn't exist anymore, and the stuff that does exist, even from the same town, meaning rival newspapers, not oftentimes, but it's not unusual for two newspapers covering the same event to get the facts wrong, right? So it's a very interesting scenario when you're trying to retell, if you can, or gather information about what you think should be an historical fact, only to pull on the thread, Kyle, that you mentioned, and go down that rabbit hole. And here's one of many. So you have this player called Archie Stark. Archie Stark, to state from the beginning, and then I'll go back and tell you a little bit about him. Archie Stark was one of the United States' greatest goal scorers in the 1900s. You go back prior to Tab Ramos and what I subjectively call the modern era. Just go prior to 1980, subjectively speaking, the modern era, 80 up to now. If you go back the previous 100 years, this man was the greatest goal scoring American forward in that previous century. And he was born in Scotland in 1896 or 7. There's some dispute about that. Got on a boat, emigrated to the United States, emigrated over to near Kearney, wasn't Kearney, but was one of those New Jersey towns, and then started playing in the early teens for some leagues and played in some finals back in the day. There were two rival competitive leagues. One, it wasn't called the Open Cup then, Lamar Hunt Open Cup. It was played then, but under a different name. And then there was another rival cup called the AFA Cup, the American Football Association Cup. But he quickly, in his late teens, 15, 16, 17, came on the American scene. It was an absolute superstar. He must have been equivalent to our own Cav Sullivan, right? A young phenom. And the war interrupted, and he came back after World War One, after serving for the United States, and then got signed by the New York team in that first league. That not the first league, the first fully functioning professional league, the American Soccer League. And he was right away for the New York team, the leading goal scorer for that team. Then he was bought by the Bethlehem Steel for the 23 to 24 year, and then his second year for the Bethlehem Steel amassed a single season scoring record of 67 goals, which by far puts him head and shoulders above any other goal scorer in any epoch in American history. Now, people who are listening carefully might say, well, that's because the team stunk. Okay, well, that's not necessarily true. It could be that the bottom couple teams stunk, but my retort to that is he scored 67 goals in this professional league during the time when the offsides rule was different, fundamentally different. You had to have three people behind the ball at all time. I want to restate that again. Three defenders, a goalie almost always, and two other field players had to be behind the ball until FIFA changed it in 1924 to 25. Now, I don't know how it's possible for referees to keep track then of two or three people, right?
Yeah.
But the fact remains is it was a very defensive organized show. And in the 20s, teams started taking advantage of that fact that the defenders almost always had the advantage. So for anybody in any league, let alone a professional league, to score not 20 goals, not 40, but 67, put this guy, Archie Stark, up there. And if that wasn't enough, guys, just let me go. Here's the rabbit hole. 1925, he suited up twice for the United States men's national team against Canada in 2 games. And in one of those games, we beat Canada 6-1, and Archie Stark in that game scored 5 goals, which puts him at the very top of the heap of who scored the most goals in the United States men's national team journey. Sure, it's in the mid-20s. Sure, it's old, but come on, 5 goals is no joke. The rabbit hole, the New York Times says 5 goals right in the top. Archie Stark. It's a 2-inch headline. Archie Stark scores 5 goals. Well, when you go to the newspapers, not only in New York, but all around the country, they have it listed 10 different ways. Some have 4, some have 3, some have 2. So it's just a remarkable story of this young man, and somebody with better chops than I should write a book about him, right? He's the Babe Ruth. He was called the Babe Ruth of soccer at that time, actually, by Ed Sullivan. Other soccer players would go on to get that name, that moniker, but he was the first. Little old Archie Stark, an American, quickly became an American citizen in his teens, served the United States military, was asked to go to the World Cup in 1930, turned him down, but a story or even a film could be made about this remarkable soccer player that very few people know that much about.
That's very interesting, and I appreciate you sharing that because it's stories like that that when you go, there's so much untold, like you said, soccer history in this country, and so to hear that's really awesome, and I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I had no idea, if I'm being honest. So I thought that was really interesting to read about for sure.
Um, One other thing I want to talk about. So you touched on the ASL a little bit. Ultimately, what was their downfall? And prior to the NASL, because we'll get to that in a second,
Mhm.
what were other leagues that were popping up in between the ASL's closure and, the NASL?
Right. So let's talk about briefly the decline and then
Mhm.
almost extirpation of the ASL. The ASL there had a rocky start in 1921 to 22, but by the mid 20s, it was on a roll. It was so much on a roll that the owners were looking abroad across the pond and started siphoning off professional players from Scotland, Ireland, England, Wales to some degree, and even some places in Europe that caused the ire of the British English Football Association and the Scottish Football Association because they weren't paying their players as much as an American owner was willing to pay. And in some cases, agents would go to their homes or on the side of pitches and they would recruit them off the field to, hey, come get on a steamship and come to America. You'll earn 2 to 3 times more than you're paying here. And that happened to the point where newspapers got involved and started calling it, quote unquote, the American menace. That's a phrase, an American menace. You go over there and play, you can't come back. And there's been reports of some guys said, well, listen, if I'm going to make 3 times more for the Yanks, I'm not playing for you. I don't need my factory job over here. I'm heading to Boston. I'm heading to Philadelphia. And that happened. So for a couple of years there, the teams were making money. What happened is, again, these are all stories in and of themselves. They're rabbit holes, they're individual. Other people need to write about them, discover them. What happened in the 1928 period is a baseball owner by the name of Charles Stoneham, who owned the New York Giants at the time, before he moved his franchise to San Francisco. He was always against what was then called the United States. It was the United States Soccer Federation. It wasn't called that a couple of acronyms ago, but it's the same federation. He hated that soccer was being run by a loosely organized proto-amateur situation. And that's what it was. Stoneham's a New York, he's a businessman and a charlatan at that. He wanted the ASL to form its own league and to get out of the Open Cup and stop playing all these games and cup games, just play our own cup. And they started a battle that ended up in a rival league being formed in 1928. So imagine ASL is getting onto its feet. It's coming into the end of its first decade. It is making money. It's siphoning players from Europe. Yeah, it's got some fan bases that are coming. I mean, for big games at the end of the season or rival games or even cup games, there's reports of 12, 13, 15, 16,000 people in their model cars, their early model cars and their horses and their carriages around these games. Come on, that's amazing. That's beating half of the baseball teams. Now, I know baseball is playing a lot of games, right? But you can't complain about 15,000 people in the mid 20s. Charles Stoneham, though, starts this internal war with the federation that results in a rival league. This is bad for business. You have confusion for fans, and there's a lot of details about which teams jumped. Some stayed in the ASL, some went for a couple months and then jumped back from the competition. Players didn't know what was going on. Money's involved. There was even lawyers involved. And anytime you get lawyers involved, you know that conversations have reached a nadir. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, they spent a year arguing about this and people not knowing which league was the best and just disarray. And remember, we're talking about working class people here. We're talking about first, second generation immigrants and people that are in the towns and the mills and some of the factories in the Industrial Revolution. And then once they got back on their, I'm sorry, once the argument got ironed out, we're not going to have two leagues anymore. We're going to have this reunification. We're going to come back and join each other and sing kumbaya. Then we have the Great Depression in the late fall of 1929, which immediately sent shockwaves around the world, but particularly went right to the heart of the United States blue-collar immigrant fan base. And the country, as we all know and historians, spent the next 5 years or so in utter disarray, not knowing the future. And it wouldn't, of course, get better materially, people argue, until almost 10 years later, until the entry into World War II, which really put people back to work. But that 1-2 punch, known as the internal, quote, soccer war, followed by the Great Depression, effectively destroyed the up-and-coming soccer communities. And it is not recovered since then. Well, now it is. Come on, we can celebrate the MLS, but it really knocked the wind out of our sails up until the arrival of the NASL. Now, your second question was about rival leagues and teams. Do you want me to hit on that prior?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is going to be hard to describe. I'm just going to hit it at a high level.
Okay.
You flash forward into the 1940, of course, is World War I, and the war is a devastating, worldwide event that really, soccer was barely being played, certain pockets around the United States. People may know that the United States in 1950, the first World Cup post World War II, the United States goes down to Brazil and ends up beating the Three Lions in England in one match, known as one of the greatest upsets of all time under a FIFA umbrella. Has another whole story and even a movie about it. But except for that one bright spot, because we lost the other two games, from 1950 up until 1990, the United States barely won any World Cup qualifying matches, and indeed never qualified for the World Cup for 50 years rather, almost 50 years, until Paul Caligiuri's shot heard around the world. So the soccer at the highest level, the federation level, United States team, was in disarray. As to leagues, they were pockets all around America that were playing virtually semi-pro. And this is where you get into people from every city who has these really old, storied, quote unquote, ethnic clubs. In Philadelphia, you can list them like United German Hungarians, the Ukrainian Nationals, VE Ertzberg, all of these clubs that have fan bases rooted in their local ethnic and wonderful communities were playing soccer football. And yeah, it was a lot of immigrants or first generation Americans. There's also guys that were Americans that were going to college. But listen, they might be lucky if they got $100 or $200 a game, right? It's loosely organized. In fact, it's disorganized. There's all arguments. I mean, it's not a fully professional league, right? They argue about how old people are. They argue about where you're getting these guys. Those people who are listening to this who have relationships with these clubs know that it's both wonderful and aggravating at the same time, because there's no real unity involved, right? There's no real national association. So for 1950, 1960, going to 1970s, really the people who were playing soccer in America were really playing semi-pro, or when they're young, you get as good as you can and you go to college, and college was carrying the pail. Like that was about as good as it
Mhm.
get. You go to St. Louis on a scholarship, that's about the highest level soccer you're going to play as an American. And then when you graduate, you settle in St. Louis, you're going to play for one of their top clubs in St. Louis. You're going to have a ball, but
Mhm.
you're not paying the rent of playing
Mhm.
soccer until the MLS comes along, and even then, you're not paying the rent because there's probably one or two Americans on every NASL roster that nobody's heard of, and very few Americans made any money because very few Americans were playing in the NASL. So to put a button on it, soccer for about a 50-year period there from 19, you can even call it 1940, you can go back to 1930. From 1930 up until 1990, and then the 94 World Cup, and then the restart of the MLS, we were in what some historians call the soccer desert. And it was some self-inflicted, some bad luck, some worldwide depression, war. It was a combination of factors. There isn't any one reason, but we didn't do ourselves a lot of good and a lot of help during a half century, while the rest of the soccer loving world was making giant strides in terms of falling in love with the sport and embedding it in their culture. We were going into a different direction.
Yeah, so let's talk about the 70s and 80s and that league known as the NASL. Obviously, Pele is part of that for a time. And that was big news. And
Mhm.
we talk about Pele, but you look at that New York Cosmos team and the names on it. It was a very loaded team for the most part. However, then you had teams like the Philadelphia Adams, you
Mhm.
had the Las Vegas Quicksilvers, you
Mhm.
had Team Hawaii, Team America, which is a great story in itself, as you know, a way for the American national team to play professional soccer year round. Most of them, some of them didn't, but that was like I don't know what your research found, but I've always been told that was the antithesis of why they created Team America. But to me, it always seemed like that league for a time was very profitable and doing well for a microcosm. And then it got too big for its shoes and tried to expand all across the US and kaput. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle, to your point, the the NASL has a lot of stories, and there have been several books written about it. And there's so
Right.
many different directions we could go. There's some successes and a lot of failures, and there's
Yes.
a lot of reason for the lots of failures. So, I mean, this is one of those questions. You have to tell me where you think your listeners or viewers would want to talk about. It's
I
about.
w- I want during your research, what were some of the most interesting things you found out about the NASL in your opinion, and maybe highlight a few successes during that
Right.
time?
So let's talk about interesting, and then I'm going to morph that into maybe negative or just weird.
And that's fine. That's fine.
So I'm in my 50s, so I never saw an NASL game, and I don't know if you know anyone who has. So I'm all going by old clips
Yeah.
on the internet or just
Same.
reading about it, right?
Mhm.
I
So
went
what?
to I went to the New York Cosmos soccer camp back in the 80s. I don't know if you remember those. Like when I was a kid, like we would go to, and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but it's funny. We would watch at times old videos of NASL matches, like full matches, like New York Cosmos versus the Tampa Bay Rowdies or somebody like that. And it was so interesting, but you're right. I never was at one because by that time I was into soccer. The league was folded. So it's just going off of old clips.
Yeah. Hey, so let's do it in a two parts fashion. Part
Okay.
one is a lot of the stupid things that they did. And hindsight's 2020, right? Let's be
Right.
honest. We we can laugh at all the dumb things, but they really were dumb. And it's okay to talk about it. It's over, it's history. We've learned from it, we've gotten a lot better. But let's run through a couple dumb things that the NASL did. Okay. So listen, imagine you're going to create a soccer league. And for actually the first year or two, by the way, you're going to fight about which ownership group, because that's another story in and of it. You had two ownership groups that were at each other's throats from the beginning at the 1968. We just had this problem in 1929 that led to the death of the other league. People not understanding that we're connected. It doesn't mean you got to get along necessarily, but lawyers matter, league documents matter. eyeballs matter. What's good for one needs to be better for others. But no, we don't care because we're Americans. And you had two rival ownership groups at each other's throats. And FIFA didn't know what to do with this mess. They almost kicked us out. There's a whole story about that in 1960. I married the Yanks once again, screwing all this up because you have some ownership groups. The league hasn't even formed. And not only that, one league that was called an outlaw league, okay, the Federation almost named the USSF now. I think it was called the USSFA, had some football in it. They basically called this other rival ownership group an outlaw league. Well, that outlaw league in 1966 got a CBS contract worth $1 million to broadcast soccer games. Notwithstanding the fact that CBS knows they've been rendered an outlaw league, and the deal was to broadcast soccer games of players, none of which were Americans. How does this happen in America? All right, flash forward a couple years after all that gets ironed out, two rival ownership groups finally reconcile their differences. By the way, TV never did any good things for the NASL, but let's just talk about the venues. This is just low-lying fruit, but we got to talk about it. If you're playing in some of these giant gridiron stadiums that are filled with football lines, or the baseball stadiums where you have part of the pitch still with the dirt of the infield, and you're only drawing 10, 15,000, maybe 20,000 if you're lucky, and the vast majority of the seats are empty, it's a bad look no matter which way you cut it. And it's even worse if it's on TV. Now, if you're there, it's bad too. You're just, there's all these stories about these, to your point about these superstars. There weren't a lot of superstars in 1968 through 1974, the first 7 years. But once you start getting into the mid 70s, you have these guys, alpha males at the end of their career that are used to playing in front of wonderfully 50, 60, 70,000 people in some of the European stadiums. And here they are in these cavernous NFL stadiums with mostly Americans who didn't really know the game, perhaps didn't know when to chant or when to clap. On gridiron stadiums, it was just a bad optical look all the way around. And hey, who are the Americans? There may be an outside back or a goalie playing, but there's no youth academy. So bad venues. Now, why couldn't you fix that? In order to build a soccer-specific stadium takes millions and millions of dollars, even in the late 60s or 70s. So there were economic reasons why the NASL was stuck with the stadiums. So it wasn't an easy fix. But they were awful. Okay. They were awful. And the pitches were awful. The TV deals always reneged on their contracts. Yeah, well, we'll broadcast 5, 10, 15 games, and they never did because nobody wanted to watch it. And then in the 70s, they started putting teams in places that were ill-suited for football. I say football, I mean soccer, right? Who wants to go to Hawaii? First off, how can you fly teams from the East Coast to how much of a wage bill or just the logistics of getting a team from New York to Hawaii? I mean, are you guys crazy? Who's in these meetings that would think it would be a good idea to put a team in Hawaii? By the way, the fans even hated it. It's freaking hot out there. You would have to come in at halftime and put your cleats in a bucket of water. And some of the pros talk about burns that have never healed, talked about how it burnt the weather, the heat, the turf, burnt the rubber of the 1970s shoes. I mean, that's crazy. We even tried to put a team in Las Vegas. Now, I don't have anything against Las Vegas, right? But that's not necessarily a cool climate to play soccer.
And where they played at, which is Sam Boyd Stadium, there's no cover, and they were playing in the middle of summer.
And we've been to Vegas many times, including in August. Yeah.
Who wants to go see Pele play in a stadium like that? It's freaking 100 degrees in the shade, let alone on the turf level where your ankles are, right? So there's a whole host of really dumb things that were done. And then primarily, though, the league was formed in a way when some of the big pocketed owners at the time started dipping deeper and bringing over aging superstars, starting with Pele. He was a superstar. He was 34 at the time, 35. So he was at the tail end of his career, and they did a remarkable thing. Nobody thought that Pele would show up in a New York Cosmos jersey, and for a time there, it was remarkable. He was drawing 2, 3 times more fans than the year prior and filling stadiums wherever he went. But the other team owners looked at this and said, "Hey, we'll just buy our own superstars," of which they did, and it made the NSL, quote unquote, the first melting pot
Mm-hmm.
of any league in any sport. But it was an experiment at the time. And did it work for a while? And for some, sure. Beckenbauer, Cruyff,
Yeah.
Pele is going to fill some stands. But once you get down into the long list in the teens and the 20s and 30s of some of these guys, it's not really moving the needle. And it's bankrupting a team and a league that never paid attention to the American athlete, American youth development. I think I mentioned not one NASL team in 16 years ever had a fully functioning youth academy. They would charge Kyle's parents money to go to a camp, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's no youth over there being developed to play for the first team. It was a ridiculous business model. It's never going to work. It was a cash grab, if you will. That's an easy way of looking at it. And I'm not saying it was doomed to failure, but it had too many hurdles to overcome. And it finally collapsed and on its own weight, but not without a couple years there of drawing some remarkable fans. And soccer became cool there for a while to talk about your kid playing soccer at cocktail parties and going to a Cosmos game. Yeah, it was fun for a while. And it
Yeah,
had cheerleaders galore, by the way.
they
Cheerleaders,
did.
bucks, trumpets, horns, fire trucks, hang gliders, motorcycles, bombs going on. It
And,
was
and,
all razzmatazz for the Americans.
and fun story about Pele. So during that one year, the Las Vegas Quicksilvers, which if you ever go back and research their history, it's hilarious. Because for one year they had what's his name? Oh, he
Brazil,
was, Por-
Brazil.
yeah,
Yeah.
Portuguese guy. He was from Portugal. Famous in his country. The Quicksilvers basically spent their entire roster to get him in, and he only
Right.
played 17 games and scored 2 goals. And this guy was like one of the best goal scorers during his era, and so it was interesting, just like reading, going back. So I always encourage people, like, you want to hear an interesting story? They wanted to take Las Vegas big and bring soccer to the desert, and it just utterly collapsed, and they had to move somewhere. I forget where they moved to. I think it was Texas. But anyway,
Yeah, a lot of owners, not just Americans, but there were foreign owners as well, lost a lot of money on the NASL. And then even Cosmos, that was being backed by Time Warner. Time Warner at the time, they eventually had to throw in the towel too because they were losing tons of money. And it was after that, if anybody remembers the Atari back in the 80s, Rubik's Cube, breakdancing, and Space Invaders, Atari started losing their division, lost a lot of money,
yeah.
and the Cosmos couldn't even afford to pay their wage bill for the soccer team. But what a glorious name! Somebody probably still owns that name, and maybe it'll pop up in America's soccer future.
But no, I always found that funny. But anyway, let's kind of shift. Post World Cup, MLS comes on the scene. Um, Can you share with our listeners maybe what during your research the early days of MLS were like, especially with the ownership structure, and then Don Garber coming in and kind of resetting the league and it kind of becoming what it is today, in your opinion?
Right. So let's recall, where did the MLS come from? Briefly tell that story. In order to host the World Cup in 1994, the FIFA granted it under one condition, which is perhaps the only favor FIFA has ever truly done for the Yanks. They said in 1988 or 89, when we won the right to host in 94, we're going to give you the rights to host, but you have to create a fully professional league. Because at the time, the NASL had died in 1984, played its last game. Things fragmented over the United States. People were playing semi-professionally. We had two teams on opposite ends of the coast that formed and reformed and joined and never really got off out of Division II status. So we're going into 1989, out qualifying yet for 50 years, by the way. FIFA was like, listen, We saw that the Yanks did a great job with the Olympics in 1984, including the soccer games. And we know that America has a lot of money, and we know that they can put on a great show, and they have a lot of electronics and media for sports. So it's primed to really put on a great show, except for the fact that it doesn't have a professional league, a soccer league. So yeah, you must create one. And that's where you have lawyers involved. And there's a whole story and wonderful stories about this as you go into the early 90s. As the United States is preparing to host in 94, there are a series of planners behind the scenes creating league documents and ideas to to grow soccer. I'm sorry, to create a system and a league document that's going to support a league for the long term and try to not make the same mistakes that they had made at least in two prior iterations. There's a third league. We're not going to get into that. We had a crazy league, though, in 1894 and 1895 for about a month under the baseball people, soccer league, that didn't work either. But now we're going into basically you can say it, the third league. So how are we going to do this? So I think that is important. Some people know about it. Some people who know about it hate it. Some people know about it, understand it. The important point to realize is that the league known as the MLS got started by Alan Rothenberg and his right-hand man, Mark Abbott, and other planners on the level of legal documents because they had time to think about it and they wanted to create a league that would be sustainable. They wanted to create legally some type of structure where one or more owners could not just go on a spending spree and just outbid or outspend anybody, and that they really realized from the beginning that soccer-specific stadiums were the way to go, but they couldn't buy them and build them before the league got started. So they thought very carefully about this, and they came up with this single entity structure idea. A lot of stuff has been written about this. The gist of it is this: when an ownership group buys into the MLS, it buys into the right to host and run its own team in its own city, in its own stadium, but you're really buying into your right to revenue share with all the other entities around the league. So while you have a right to do your own thing for in your own city, everyone shares on your success or failure. And that means parking, ticket sales after a certain number, shirts from your own homegrowns or your own people. All this stuff has evolved in 30 years. So you can't just say, well, what is it? What were it? Well, no, it changes because the lawyers and the business people reevaluate it every year. But the single entity structure means that all the teams that started at 10, now up to 30, you share in this revenue stream where you have to pay attention to what are people doing, and there's checks and balances the whole way through. Now, people will criticize, and this is absolutely true, I'm not giving my opinion. The league got started to underscore and protect stability over excellence at first because it had already failed 3 times on American soil. Instead of getting going like many of the soccer-loving countries got 100 years ago, sink or swim, you stink, you go down, 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 then you die, right? The whole survival of the fittest, which soccer people love the world over, and I love it too. Yeah, we tried that, and it's not going to work in the 1990s. So we had this single entity structure that has evolved tremendously. So whatever it was in league documents in 1996 does not look like it now, but it is still generally a shared revenue model. But to your point, yeah, they didn't want to start MLS in 1995. 1994, United States hosts. It was a glorious hosting. We United States, you may recall, listeners, we got out of the round, got in and played Brazil. Brazilians got a guy ejected, and we played a pretty good game, but ultimately lost to the Seleco, and they went on to win the World Cup in 94. The MLS people decided not to start the league the next year because they believed, rightly so, that it would be a bad look to go from 70,000 people and all this wonderful, jubilant atmosphere of the World Cup to all now go into a more modest 15, 20 grand stadiums, which they were predicting. And it turned out to be the right idea. In 96, the league got started, but it did pretty well its first year in terms of league and numbers and TV. But then it took not a nosedive, but it was trending in the wrong direction. Right. So for the first 5-8 years of the league, it was in doubt whether it would not end up going the same way as every other soccer league in America. So I'll pause. I'm sorry. I went on a long whirlwind there, but it was
No,
certainly
no,
not a success its first 5 years.
no, and I'm glad you brought that up because I feel like with a lot of younger soccer fans they know the new iteration, let's put it that way, of MLS. That
Mhm.
still to this day, unless you really hear the origins or were there when MLS started, you don't know it. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But yes, please continue.
Well, so to underscore it, so you have this league now. I think it's important to realize for people who are listening, people in America have very different opinions and different ways of coming to sport, and there's nothing wrong with that. The
Yeah,
10
Mhm.
is great. It's vibrant. It's
Mhm.
growing. It's
yeah,
okay to
Yeah.
disagree. It's okay to get angry. It's okay to be happy and joyous. But
yeah,
and the MLS is a hot button issue. What I found in doing it back home to my students who are living the dream, they are all in my school where I like 85 of them, eighth, seventh grade, basically 12th grade, trying to become professional soccer players. Maybe 20% will go pro, the other 80% go to college, but they love soccer. All of them, almost to a T, come into my 10th grade class hating the way MLS, no, relegation, we suck a lot. I'm like, guys, you better not say we suck too much louder because you're trying to play for this. Why are you bad mouthing the very league that you're trying to join? That's number one.
yeah.
And number
Mhm.
two, do you guys realize why we don't have promotion and relegation? And then they get to read my book and we talk about it. So to be brief about it,
Mhm.
the MLS would not exist without creating league documents that created a certain type of ownership revenue sharing model that would sustain a league across 3 continents. This is not done in any other country. You can get around England by train. It's about the size of Colorado, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Imagine all these teams in England. It's the size of freaking Colorado, whatever division you're in, on up to the Premier League. Well, America doesn't operate like that.
Mhm.
And in order to support the league, we had to engage in this franchise model. Now, for most people who don't know about soccer or come to soccer late, they probably don't care about this issue, right? They're okay with the Browns sucking year after year, right?
Right.
Okay, it's fine. That's the way it's always been.
Mhm.
You can't go down to like NFL B level. So this whole soccer issue doesn't mean anything to them. Then you take the people like me, frankly, or others, you guys, maybe a lot of listeners, we love soccer. We love the idea of survival of the fittest. We love the fact that the little town Wexham can come up and get an American owner and buy some players and get lucky and climb the ranks to the highest. And the big wigs like Tottenham can almost fall, but save themselves. These are glorious stories, man. But listen, if you want a league in America, you can't get the league started with the amount of money that we're talking about to host the teams and put it on. Other people will say, well, let it fail then. Yeah, well, it's not practical. And we don't want to spend too much more time on this because I'm all for promotion relegation. My wife is all for promotion relegation. My son, who's in the academy, is all for promotion relegation. But he, because he's had my class, realizes now, listen, I understand now why they do it because, soccer in America, there has to be some revenue sharing metric for a while. And the salaries have to be, you can't just buy however you want, or we're going to be back into the late 70s situation where some ownerships are going to just buy and it's going to bankrupt other ownership groups. We're getting there. We just have to be more considerate about how we move from the franchise model that we have now into some more a different type of model that looks a little bit more like what's going on in Europe.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then you have USL going, doing the pro rel route with doing their restructuring as well. What are your thoughts on what USL is doing?
I think what USL is doing is great. I think it's wonderful. The USL, if they can do what they say they're going to do, which is create this interlocking 3-tiered group, is going to be awesome. It's going to create more games that really matter all the time, including the last couple of games of the year. Obviously, that's just the way promotion relegation works. They're going to get more eyeballs. Some of the better teams that have more money and more revenue, better fan bases, they're going to love it. It's a great idea. But I think it's also going to be fraught with some of the same problems that have been problematic all the time. If you have a USL circuit where teams are on different sides of the
Mhm.
coast and you have an up and coming team that now plays really well and gets promoted, are they going to be able to increase their stands, their parking, their employees, their travel budget to get to the East Coast, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of things here that are difficult, not impossible, but with difficulty, oftentimes money. Okay. Like they have to make money. So what
Mhm.
is the how are they going to solve these things? So you're answering the question. I love what USL is doing. If you've ever been to a high level USL game, man, you can feel the excitement brewing and the different model in America. So bravo to them. But let's also understand that people are not doing things to lose money. They have to make money. And it's not as easy to catch up to the rest of the world by what they've been doing for over a century. And frankly, there's been books written about this. Europeans are okay with teams going bankrupt, right? Because they go to the
Yeah.
local, the bank is supporting the local club, and they also have the accounts of half the town. They're not going to make the club file for bankruptcy. Don't tell me an American bank is going to give carte blanche to somebody. It doesn't work
Right.
like that in America. That's just one little anecdote. Love what they're doing, but it's fraught with logistical problems and the fact that people need to make money in America.
Mhm. My other thing is, and I've always heard this argument, I'd be curious about you. How do you tell somebody that buys a team for what? I'll just make up $10 million that the next year they could be relegated. You know what I'm saying? And how do you explain that then to the modern American fan that maybe is trying just getting into
Yeah,
soccer?
I gotcha. So when I get to it in the chapter, I teach English, but I also teach a class on the history of United States soccer. That's what really got me
Yeah.
to
Mhm.
Genesis of the book. When we get to the MLS this year, for example, was very easy. I like come in, they get the book bags down, I yell at them, they rage bait me for a while, put your phones away, stop, pay attention, phones away. Then we go on the smart board and I call up an article from I don't know, Sports Illustrated Athletic about the ownership group from San Diego, right? There's lots of
Mhm.
this stuff. It takes 5 seconds. They
Mhm.
paid $500 million, okay, 2.5
Mhm.
years ago, I think,
Yeah.
to buy in to the MLS, making them the 39th or 29th or 30th team. $500 million before one stone is overturned to create a stadium, before a coach is hired, before a youth academy is established, before a uniform design is formed, before any other money is spent to orchestrate what these guys enjoy in Chester. $500 million. Okay. And you're going to tell me that Mr. San Diego, whatever his name is, the ownership group, and Mr. San Diego's lawyers would ever permit their ownership group to fork over $500 million for a team that if they come in last place or the bottom three the next year could go to minor league soccer. Okay. You got to look at this like an ownership
Yep.
group.
Yeah.
Okay. And the guys I'm not making it up. That is a half a million. How much more do you think that ownership group is going to have to spend to put the product on the field that's doing pretty well? Well, they're spending upwards of $1 billion already. They're not going to do that if they can fall. Now, listen, this gets into the whole hotbed issue, and I'm not
Right.
saying I know what I'm talking. Everyone's different
Yeah.
opinions about
Mhm.
Yeah.
it. If you understand that kind of money is being put out there, nobody is going to enter the league. People are saying, well, fine, just let it die a death, right? But okay, but it's not practical. And another thing that people don't realize is the MLS people, this is important. The MLS people are not just buying into their right to run a team in their own zip code. They're also buying into this legal entity called SUM. I hope this is okay because it's detailed. SUM, Some is very important. In the early 2000s, when the league was headed for disaster, 2002, 2003, it wasn't doing well. People were losing money, hundreds of millions of dollars they were losing.
Yep.
They were trying to keep it out of the press. Well, they needed to decide what they were going to do: kick the ball down, same artificial turf, doing things as usual, or quadruple down, which is a phrase that Don Garber used. Well,
Yep.
some of the ownership groups decided to quadruple down. Why quadruple down? Because they knew they needed to create soccer specific stadiums and they needed to create this legal entity. And that's what's important. This legal entity bought into it was a media rights group that would buy television and now electronic media rights to broadcast high level games. At the time, it was the 2002 World Cup and the 2006 World Cup because they outbid the other big fish in the sea. But can you imagine this? ABC, ESPN, they got outbid. And now in 2010, Some couldn't have that kind of money. But it's important. When you buy into an MLS team now, you're not just buying into your right for your San Diego. You're also getting a nice slice
Mhm.
of what this SUM group does. And now they're broadcasting regional events, of which there are many. And there's criticism for that because they take advantage of the Mexican national team and it kind of siphons money away from the USSF. But it's a sustainable way that we have soccer, right?
Mhm.
These guys need to make, and girls, these guys, women and women need to make money. And that's the way America works, unfortunately. And I don't think promotion relegation is coming. We can argue about it all we want, but it's not going to happen. Maybe they'll do some quasi thing.
Right.
Mhm.
It's not that smart to figure out. I think we got to live with it for a while and keep changing the DP, get more and more players. We get a bump out of the World Cup, right? Better and better players, pay them more and more, get 4 or 5 designated players, get rid of it. I don't know. Let's try to work on some other things before we talk about promotion relegation.
And that's just it.
Yeah. And I think that leads to a good segue to, I want to talk about, of course, the biggest news going on right now, the World Cup being
Yeah.
hosted, in North America, which has been amazing. And I think I saw you were at the game last night, weren't you?
Oh yes, thank you. We got rained upon. It
Yeah.
was great to see France though. When you see the players that France has covering ground live, chasing a
Mhm.
ball 20, 30 meters. I was with my son. It's just incredible to see the athletes and how explosive they are and how quick they are when they can go from a standing walk into a full out sprint on a glorious stage. It was great. It was wonderful. And I'm
Yeah,
sure this is happening all around America to all the people. Hope some in the tent, some are in and out of the tent or coming into the tent. Go to a high level soccer game.
yeah,
Enjoy yourself.
yeah,
Tell me you don't love
absolutely.
this sport.
I know that's how I got hooked really going to the Union games, for instance. The first time I went, I was like, this is great. And at that point, really my experience going to games, my parents took me to some Harrisburg Heat games when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and going to the indoor.
Yeah.
You
And
guys have tickets? Are you going to be able to get to any maybe?
so I did have tickets to Thursday with Curacao and Cote d'Ivoire, but I sold them to one of my students because unfortunately, we were double booked that day,
Yeah.
and we're going to be in the media fantasy
Okay.
camp for the Union. And it was a tough decision because I really wanted to do the World Cup too,
Sure.
um, but no, just prayers for my ACL that I don't tear it, right? But
Yes. Yes.
but back to World Cup, yeah, like we had some friends that were at the game last night too, and and some have gone to some of the other games, and
Yeah.
just you know what an amazing experience. And it's wonderful to see people from all over coming together, and people really like people that aren't even into soccer, talking about it. I go coach swim team in the evenings, and my swimmers will even say to me, hey, did you see Mbappe scored, or
Yeah.
can you put the World Cup game on the TV that we have in there? And last night I was actually trying to put it on for them and it wasn't working, but it was like they're like, oh, like they're so into it. And so I think that's really cool, and it can really bring a lot of you know, more interest to it. And maybe that feeds into, oh, hey, people had fun going to soccer games this summer and seeing all that. Maybe they go to, say, a Union game, or, they go to whatever games. But, um, you know, do you think, like for you on a personal note, just with all your research and, all that, just to have a little more meaning for you going and witnessing that in person, think about how far the US has come, even?
Yeah, you know what? It's just confirmation for me. Like when you look at America, we're 340 million people or so, right? And this has been research about this. When you look at the soccer people, different studies and different people and different theorists, if you will, or sociologists have talked about, well, soccer for years. Soccer's not that blah 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 blah. And then they take a poll, and it's 60, 70, 80 million say they either follow soccer or like soccer or something, right? It depends which poll you're looking at. What is wrong with 50 million people loving soccer, right, in
Hmm.
America? I don't care. I don't care about the gridiron people. Fine. I'll
Yeah.
watch the playoffs. I don't dislike the Eagles. I don't dislike NBA. College,
Hmm.
Yeah.
baseball, don't like. Fine. But my point is, and it's not a unique opinion. If you look at America and you can say we got 50, maybe 60 million people, and maybe after the World Cup, maybe we get, a couple million here, a couple million there, and it keeps evolving. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot of money. And you do not need to overtake. Oh, when is America's never going to be a gridiron? NFL, fine. I admit that. Soccer in America will never be bigger than the NFL. Say it. I don't care. So what? But if I was a Major League Baseball player or a hockey player, okay, and even any NBA guy, except for the playoffs, I'd be worried in the next 10 years if you're just going to look at sheer numbers of people who are going to go to games. People can laugh all they want. The MLS teams last year averaged 500,000 fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
The NBA and the NHL were in the 17s and 18s for their regular season, right? And the MLB was in 29, 30,000. But that's only the top 15 teams. If you take the bottom half the league, they're in the teens. Soccer is already could it be doing better? Are there certain markets that may be not doing so well and occasionally suffering? Yes. But the idea that American soccer is here, it's been here for 150 years. The league, it's got a structure now. It's on into its 31st year. It's got 30 teams. It rivals the other three sports in North America. And it's a locked league. I mean, people hate it that it's locked, but that's great for business. There are people in Europe and South America that would love to enter a locked league, if you will. And the fact that it's going to maybe not inch, it's going to walk, not sprint towards the way we do things in Europe, into the European model. And the amount of money and stadiums and interest we have already prior to this World Cup is already setting MLS on an optimistic trajectory. So when you ask me personal opinions, when I go there with my son, I'm sitting there with my son. 30 years ago, my dad took me to an Eagles game where I watched a guy spill a beer on somebody else over here to the left, and another guy that had his hat behind here, another guy behind him. It was a Dallas Cowboys hat. The guy lit the hat on fire. That was funny. That was funny for a 13-year-old. And I liked the Eagles. Here I am at the World Cup with my son. He doesn't follow football, American football. He doesn't follow baseball. He goes to the academy. We're watching Mbappe. I'm in Philly. Took me 25 minutes to get to the stadium. What is there not to love about American soccer? Where we are now, where we're going to be 5 or 10 years from now. Come on, guys. The tent is here, and we don't need, I hate the complainers, the naysayers, the football, the gridiron. We don't care. I don't care about you guys. Fine. Us 50 million, 60, 70, 80 million Americans who care about the sport, welcoming people in every year. It's more diverse. It's coming. I am optimistic about it. We still got lots of problems, man. Pay to play, lock league. Yeah, it's problems, but it's not capital P problems, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And on top of that, if there's, even if you need another reason to be optimistic, you look at the United States team, and they're causing a lot of excitement here. We have a big following here in Lancaster, even, huge watch party downtown Lancaster. I was floored by how many we had. And you have the local ties, of course, Christian Pulisic. We kind of claim him. Hershey is Lancaster adjacent, right? And then you have, 4 guys that came through the union. Being on the national team, 3 of them
How
YSC
incredible is
grads,
that?
like
That
something,
is ridiculous
right?
in and of itself.
Yes.
Yeah, when you think about the small number, relative, and you have 4 that came through the union,
Well,
3 graduated from
3,
YC Academy.
yeah,
and even beyond that, you look at the U.S. team,
hmm
and we talk about, how many of those players went through MLS academies? You think about that number,
hmm
and then you look at some of these teams. How many players, like U.S. versus Paraguay? There were players that came through or currently on MLS clubs. Like, how many MLS ties are on other national clubs that fans that just follow the Premier League or Bundesliga or Serie A don't understand? I think that was something that was cool for me as well.
yeah, like MLS being worldwide. I mean, you see
Yeah.
Danley out there playing,
Yeah.
the full 90 for Haiti, and but there's, and just I'd love to see McConaughey get a chance in there. But
Interesting.
but you see like all these guys, yeah, with MLS even being worldwide. So I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, honestly, it's super exciting right now. So.
Yeah, I think the last chapter of my book, chapter 20, underscores this very point that the American youth player at its most elite level is being supported by MLS teams that are putting money and time, infrastructure, coaching, and solving the academic piece for the players. And yes, return on investment, because this is all very expensive, is an ongoing issue with both all the MLS owners who are dealing with their youth academy and the bill that comes with. But I know without a doubt that if 5 of the 30, 10 of the 30 MLS teams would truly be able to create youth academies that are structured from U8, U10, U12, start it where you want, up until high school graduation, and try to imitate what's worked with the union and a couple other teams by solving for the educational piece. Because bravo, you don't get a first team contract, fine. You're going to just about you're going to college, sometimes on a soccer scholarship, and you're using your experience that you've generated and accumulated for 4 or 5 years here to open the college door. It's a win-win. It's the stuff that a Brazilian kid or a Croatian kid who isn't quite good enough to make the local pro team. It's the things that his dreams are made of, right?
Hmm.
An MLS academy that has a pipeline to the first team that figures out a way in their region to accumulate talent and to train them in a professional environment every day, every week, every month. And then with the high school, that's the big thing. How do you solve for the educational? Because most of you are not going to go pro, but you put that into a flywheel effect like what the union does. And look at the statistics. As you mentioned, three from YC Academy on this summer's World Cup team. They have 107 caps together. The seven guys from the YSC Academy, men who are now playing at clubs all around the world, have accumulated in the last 5 years, 7 years, 105 caps. That is insane for one little club
Hmm.
in Chester, where 17 years ago there was a swamp and
Hmm.
some gravel parking lots. That's just in 17 years. Come on, Arthur Blank and some of the really rich big people. Come on, guys. Let's go. Put some money into youth development. Realize that it's going to pay off long term. An amount of money that you may lose, to get it ramped up, is a pittance into what you're eventually going to get back. And we don't need all 30 teams to do it. If Inter Miami just wants to spend, fine. I'm happy about that. That's going to help too.
Hmm.
But why can't we have 5 to 10 MLS teams that figure out and really truly realize that the American pipeline and the development of the American player from young teens is the way it's being done in the rest of the world, and figure out how to do it for their region and their club, and get the full support of local businesses on up to big wigs like Coca-Cola and Home Depot and company, and figure out a way to do it right, man. We are already fairly competitive on the international level. What could we be doing 10, 15, 16 years, 4 World Cups from now, 16 years, if half the MLS teams would try to imitate and put what the union and some others have done by really taking seriously their youth academy? And the union has shown it. We just won the Community Shield last year, playing more homegrowns as a statistical fact, numbers of them, more minutes than any of the other 29 clubs. How can anybody argue with that statistic? It doesn't mean that all teams have to do it, but the American player is something you can bet on, and hopefully the academies will make enough money that they can realize that it's an economic justification and it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And one of the reasons why I like covering, the developmental side, the academy and Union 2 and all that is you see like these guys come up, you see that journey, and hopefully we'll see some of these guys maybe in 4 years, who knows. I mean, we'll see, Kevin, for instance, see get there,
Yeah.
some of these other guys as well, and so that it's been a real treat getting to see them. And I've talked to some of them about their experiences, how they felt supported by the club, some of the guys, I've talked to about their, living in the residency house. I just talked to Malik recently about it. I've talked to Sal Livas, Eddie Davis, some of these guys, how they feel supported. And some of these guys have talked, Frankie Westfield, they've talked about, just how they not only feel support as an athlete, but, as an individual, as a student, and it kind of encompasses everything, not just,
Well, even
the
CJ
soccer.
this
Yeah,
weekend.
we talked to CJ
CJ this
only the other
weekend,
day.
Oh,
and
Yeah.
that's
other
great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we've been going up over this World Cup break and talking
We
to
went to Brooklyn FC.
Marlon and CJ and a
Yeah,
couple of
you
Yeah,
these
talked
guys.
to how's Marlon doing? I know it had a tough first couple games, but I think they're doing better now, right?
yeah.
It's
Grinding
starting to
out.
come to it's
It's
starting
come
to
together.
come together.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not. Yeah.
that's what he was saying is, even CJ kind of mentioned us still to this day, now that he's on loan, that the impact of the academy and the players coming up, and it just was very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's always interesting to hear from them as well. But yeah, they've always um, just been so appreciative of everything that they've been afforded and the supports, with academics and nutrition and, the mental health side. I think a couple of them brought up, just how they really take care of you, like your mental health and all that as well. So, and kudos to what you guys are doing at YSC, because I've heard nothing but good things from that. So once again, Mark, I want to thank you so much for talking with us here about your book. And again, for everyone out there too, make sure you pick up American Soccer Nation. I thought it was a wonderful read.
Yes.
And just makes you appreciate soccer in the US so much more. And so Mark, for the people listening, where can they find you on social media, first of all?
Yeah, so they can find me under the book's name, American Soccer Nation. There's like a little symbol here on the side. Oh, my hat.
Hmm.
Right. So if you want to follow the book on Instagram, there's a lot of insider stuff from the Academy, YC Academy, with some of the boys who are supporting it. They actually created the logo that is the same title of the book. And of course, you can buy the book if you want, anywhere books are sold. And it's just to underscore we're all one big community. I've really pledged that throughout the book, that there's nodes across the United States in every town, whether it's Lancaster or you guys are there. I grew up in York, by the way, down on
Oh,
the banks of the Susquehanna River, right there near Accomack Inn. If
Oh,
anyone's heard of that
I
restaurant.
grew up in
wait,
York
hold
too.
up a second. That's wild because guess where he's from?
I'm
Where are
from
you from, Kyle?
York. And I grew up at Starview, right down from Saginaw, which is right
Oh
down from the
my God.
Accaback Inn,
You
right
ever
on.
do the raft race, the Susquehanna raft race?
No, no, but we used to go down to Cador's Furnace and take River Road up along. There's kids and racer bikes on River Road up there through
Yeah,
the,
Wildcat Falls down there a little
yep,
bit.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Man, small world.
Julian, are you a Yorkie and a
No.
Lancaster
I'm Lancaster my whole life. Hempfield grad. Hempfield.
Hatfield grad?
So yeah, yeah. So
But
Well, all soccer people connected, whether you're from a smaller quote unquote town or a county out in where I grew up, or whether you're in
mhm,
Philly or any of the other cities around where there are either USL teams or MLS teams. What's
mhm.
great about the soccer tent is that it exists. And sometimes you don't see how many people are there until you come to a World Cup and you realize we're everywhere, but we're all connected, and we share this love for this beautiful game. So thank you very much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So glad to have you. And
yeah,
hopefully people go out and check out your book because definitely worthwhile read. And everyone listening, yeah, go check it out. Check out his socials as well. And get out to some soccer games because it's an exciting time to be at them for sure.
it for sure is. And we'll be back here soon we have a lot to catch up on ourselves, so we'll be back for
Yeah.
another episode of the One Team We Agree On
Yep.
very soon. So keep it out. And again, Mark, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So once again, thank you to Mark Franek for joining us. That was a great conversation. Really, really enjoyed diving into the history of American soccer. I'm a huge history nerd anyway, and then you pair that with soccer, which I love as well. I mean, what's not what's not to love about that?
Yeah. No, I thought this was a great interview just about the history of the game. The not, so the down the rabbit hole story is just great.
Hmm.
That was probably one of my favorite parts talking about the NASL. And just the emergence of soccer, current state of soccer in MLS, and it was just overall a great review.
It was. It was. So definitely go out and get his book. Check it out. It's worth reading. And again, if you aren't following us, make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on our website, theoneteamweagreeon.com, our YouTube channel, and our various socials. Go check out Mark's social account as well at American Soccer Nation. And yeah, lots of soccer going on right now. So
Yeah, it's exciting
it
time.
is.
So until next time, I'm Kyle.
I'm Jillian.
We'll see you at the game.